Hello, and welcome to the second installment of Healthcare Marketing Pulse. Healthcare Marketing Pulse is a five-part webinar series for healthcare marketers from the digital marketing experts at Fathom. Today's session is going to focus on digital marketing strategies, tactics, tools in the context of the OCR Bulletin, and it is informed by our work with top hospital systems. My name is Joe Adams. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at Fathom. I'm going to be the moderator today. And so, before we dive into the content, I want to share a couple housekeeping items. First and foremost, thanks for joining and your interest today. Appreciate that. Second, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature. You'll find the Q&A feature in the middle of the Zoom bar. If you don't see it there, click those three dots next to more options, and it'll be available to you. We will answer any and all questions at the end of the session today, so fret not if we don't hit it in the moment. And finally, if you want to reach out to go deeper on a subject, you can find my email in the reminders that you received for today's session, or send a note to hello@fathomdelivers.com. With that, I'd like to introduce our host today, Jim Kohl. Jim is Fathom's president. Fun fact about Jim, prior to joining the team in 2017, Jim was a Fathom client for many years. In addition to leading our business today, Jim supports many of our top client accounts, primarily through his partnership and collaboration with chief marketing officers and senior leaders. Jim, floor is yours.
Thank you, Joe, and welcome all. We are really pleased that you chose to use your time this way. Our goal is for this to be a valuable conversation that you're a part of, and so we're glad that you chose to join us here this afternoon. Most importantly, we have some experts that I am excited to introduce and for us to hear from. The first is Elise Horst. Elise is Director of AI Solutions. She's been with Fathom for a number of years and has incredible experience at top healthcare systems, both with media strategy, media planning, measurement, reporting, and the like. And so Elise has a wealth of expertise and knowledge that I'm excited for her to impart. Our second Fathomer and expert is Scott. Scott Mowry is our Director of Data Innovation and also brings extensive experience in the healthcare industry, working not only inside of top healthcare systems, but also with our many, many clients. And so I'm excited for their wisdom, knowledge, and experience to be a part of today's conversation. As we jump in, you are likely here because you recognize that the updated guidance and ongoing conversation from OCR, the Office of Civil Rights within health, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, is a conversation that has been unclear and muddied even as often as there have been updates made to it. And so even a recent ruling by a federal judge in Texas has added increased information and potentially confusion for you and your colleagues. And so we want to dive into that and address it and explore that together. Our perspective is this, that guidance from the OCR and the bulletin, the original bulletin, the revised bulletin, and the developments since have made the situation very muddy for healthcare marketers. And so in addition to that, we've got players like Google and Meta and others in the landscape within digital marketing that are also considering evolutions around privacy concerns. And so we've got to make sense of it. We've got to be responsible marketers and mount a response to this. And so we want to be partners and help you to do that. So how can we do that today in just a few short minutes? Let's chat through our agenda. We are going to cover a number of topics intended to help you gain that solid footing around what's possible as a marketer in this space, given these developments. I should mention that we are not legal experts, so this conversation is not intended to give you any sort of legal guidance, but we do want to recognize that marketers must remain responsibly informed and take action in a responsible manner. And so that's the spirit with which we want to bring you this experience and expertise. And so the agenda today is number one, to just briefly hit an overview of the current state, how we got here, where we are in this OCR adventure. Secondly, then really make this meaningful in terms of considerations for you as it relates to advertising, tagging, tracking, measurement, and the like, and actually get specific then on strategies, tactics, and tools that you ought to consider and apply and leverage as you think about reaching and engaging and measuring your work against specific intended and valued audiences. So there are many limitations and many considerations that we need to take into account. Our intention is to tackle all of those today. Let me start with the end in mind, and that is, given all of this conversation, and we hope this is very valuable and applicable to you, very practical, but our recommendation is fairly simple at the highest level. And that is, given the bulletin, the revised bulletin, and all of the developments, as a healthcare marketer, you need to take a very conservative approach to tracking technologies. And so one approach to do that is to rely only on partners that are willing to sign a BAA. That is not necessarily the only thing you ought to consider, but that is a helpful place to start because it demonstrates that those partners and platforms likely understand not only the risks, the limitations, but also the intricacies of what's involved around this ruling and guidance. And so with that, let's start with a view of current state. If we think about all of the developments since the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and their Office of Civil Rights issued the original bulletin, we go back to December of 2022. And so at this time, the OCR Bulletin was released. The OCR stated in this bulletin that regulated entities are not permitted to use tracking technologies, online tracking technologies, in a manner that would result in impermissible disclosures of protected health information to vendors, or that would result in any other violation of HIPAA rules. And so another way to think about that is that HIPAA rules apply to regulated entities and marketers when information might be collected using online tracking technologies, pixels and cookies and the like, when that includes PHI, even on publicly facing or unauthenticated web pages. And so the implication for marketers is huge as it relates to those technologies. By July of 2023, the Federal Trade Commission sends warning letters to over 100 hospitals and telehealth providers, indicating some form of HIPAA violation. And by September in the same year, there is a response from not only some of those entities, but also a collection through the American Hospital Association, really urging Congress to remove the rule immediately. And so there is this back and forth that's now happening through a number of parties, considering the interest that everyone has in really disseminating critical information for the good of public health and the way that marketers reach audiences. In November of 23, after really no movement, the AHA files suit at that point in time. And there are a number of state hospital associations and other systems that file amicus briefs or friend of the court briefs that sort of join with that HAA suit. In 2024, there is a response from the Office of Civil Rights at HHS, and that is intended to bring clarity. As most of you likely know, that revised bulletin did nothing of the sort. And so the mere connection in this update of identifying information with an unauthenticated web page visit will not be viewed as sufficient combination to qualify the data as PHI unless that individual's visit to the web page relates to the individual's health. So what this means is that you as a healthcare marketer have to understand and discern the intent or the motivation with which each user is hitting a web property. And as you know, that simply can't happen. Even with all of the data that you have, even with all of the tracking that you've had in place, that is nearly impossible to do. They came out with an example in that revised bulletin with the intention of helping, that indicated, for example, a user hitting a web page on your system site for the purpose of academic research would not be in violation of the rule. But someone doing some research on the very same website and potentially with the same content that is, researching some diagnoses or trying to understand symptoms would likely be in violation. And so this creates a scenario that is really untenable for marketers and the use of online tracking technologies. As many of you know, in June, there is a federal judge in Texas that did vacate this guidance. And yet the end of the story has not been told on this. And so while part of that guidance has been vacated with that decision, there's much more to this conversation. It's certainly not a punctuation mark on the evolution of this topic. While all of that is happening, as I mentioned before, there are players like Google and Meta and other technology companies that, with mounting pressure, are really revamping and evolving their own privacy protocols. And so over the course of 2022, of course, many remember the Meta Pixel, being identified as a possible HIPAA violation, really started a lot of the groundswell and the concern around this. By 2024, we hear from Google that they are deprecating 1% of cookies in Chrome, which brings limitations to marketers, and signaling that later this year, they'll deprecate as many as 10% of cookies in Chrome, again, with a look to the future indications that they have intentions to disable all cookies in Chrome in 2025. As to when that actually happens, as anyone who is following that news, your guess is as good as mine, but the intention is that those will be deprecated. And so these limitations are something marketers need to not only wrap our arms around, but have a responsible course of action. And so I'd like to dig in now and hear from our experts just around some considerations. We touched on our recommendation to be conservative, but we still need to have an approach. We're still responsible for driving business results at each of our systems. And so I'd love to hear from Elise first on a number of considerations around advertising, tagging, tracking, and measurement. What are some of these considerations that we ought to take into account for each of us who are responsible and have these sets of objectives at individual health systems? Elise?
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Like Jim mentioned, I think that all of these considerations and the OCR bulletin and a lot of the ambiguity that surrounds it really leaves the door open and can be overwhelming, quite frankly, because there's a lot of varieties of factors to consider and things that you might change about your approach to marketing in order to take a conservative approach to some of the guidelines and regulations that have been shared. So just to hit on a few that we felt have been really important and impactful as we've worked with our clients, the first of which being the campaign goal. I think even with this OCR bulletin and all of the changes that have come into play, we as marketers are still responsible for similar things, right? We are still responsible to help health systems acquire patients, to reach healthcare professionals, to grow brand preference. And we still have to do those things even though we are in this different environment that we live in today. And what is really important is being able to continue to set marketing goals that relate to those things and ladder up to those larger business goals, but that are measurable within our channels so that we can still have a clear guide to measure if we are successful or not, or if we are appropriately contributing to those goals or we are not. So it's an interesting kind of push and pull between going back to basics and also having to advance our thinking. We have to kind of simplify the goals from maybe what they once were when we had more information available to us, but we also have to get creative about now how do we bridge the gap between a goal that is maybe a bit further up funnel than it once was so that we can tell that holistic marketing story. And another consideration would be surrounding media planning. So once you have that goal established and you understand what it is, the campaign that you're running is really in support of, how do you put together a holistic media plan within the confines of the OCR bulletin and all of the privacy changes that have taken place? It took a little bit of the creativity out of it because you really have to prioritize the channels and tactics and targeting methods that are available to us. And those have definitely dwindled in number since the OCR bulletin and a lot of the approaches that Meta in particular has taken to removing a lot of audience targeting capabilities surrounding healthcare topics. You are definitely not as free as you once were to kind of pick and choose all of these different tactics and channels and audiences that were once available to us. So an approach that we've taken is really thinking about how do we maximize our presence in channels where targeting is available to us and where tracking makes the most sense, and really maximize our budget there before we start to think about dipping our toe into areas where maybe we have a little bit less control over who we're reaching and the measurement that we expect to get there. So just something to consider is really thinking about the bottom of the funnel and areas where those targeting tactics are available to us and then moving our way up from there. And then lastly, on my end, in terms of optimization, so once you get a campaign live, historically you would optimize for conversions, especially in a place like Google Search, where you are at the bottom of the funnel and you're looking to get as many conversions for your dollars as you can. You really have to change. Thank you, Hannah. You really have to change what you are optimizing for. One thing that you could do is you could let your campaigns continue to run and optimize for conversions that just are no longer there. And the platform isn't quite smart enough to understand that you're just no longer tracking those things intentionally. And they will think that you just are not getting conversions and the campaigns aren't performing well. And that can really be detrimental to overall performance. So something that we recommend and that we've done with our partners is optimizing for metrics that are still available and visible to the platforms, which in most cases is clicks. If you're running an awareness campaign, you may still optimize for reach or impressions or something of that nature, but really keeping the optimization strategy in platform in line with what the platform has access to from a data standpoint, and then getting creative and thinking about how can you sort of play a manual role in limiting what the platform can optimize for based on data that you have and the platform doesn't. So if you have some insight into maybe which keywords are driving the most appointments on the back end, you can start to pause off other keywords and limit what the platform has availability to so that you can kind of play a manual role in guiding those optimizations in platform without totally losing all of the immense value that machine learning brings to the table from an optimization standpoint. So those are just a few considerations from a planning perspective, and I will pass it over to Scott, who's going to talk about tracking and reporting.
Thanks, Elise. Yeah, from the standpoint of tracking, I think the big takeaway we have is really, is what we kind of brought up in some of the earlier discussion, is really kind of thinking different about how you approach this and how can you innovate, not settle for what you did before and just think that you've lost all capability to measure. And there's a few places you can start to try to think about alternatives for tracking. One place that we encourage our clients to look at is their actual landing page technology that they use. So that could be, either your existing CMS, if you use that for the entire site, or if you use products, we mentioned here, Instapage as an example. Some of our clients use a platform like that that's separate from their main CMS for the whole website, but can give them some capabilities to track if you are pointing people then to other forms, pages, things of that sort. Another option that can be at your disposal potentially is call tracking. So if you're able to set up things like dedicated phone numbers that are exclusively for a paid campaign, that the only case where you're going to use that number is if you saw it through a campaign that you're doing, that's another way in which you can start to get it showing some conversions. Not necessarily maybe saying, here's the individual that made this call, but getting into saying that our campaign generated 15 calls in this past month just through that dedicated number. So there's options there. As Jim mentioned earlier, even with a call tracking solutions, you still need to have that BAA in place because the data, obviously phone number would be an identifiable piece of information. But from the BAA side, that would put you in a better place for using that as an option for measurement. Another way that we're seeing clients and other healthcare systems innovating is thinking about how they utilize their UTMs with their CRM system, or their maybe a new platform maybe they've moved off of or moved onto from Google Analytics. So for example, if you're using a CRM like Salesforce and your paid campaigns are driving to a landing page that has a form that feeds into Salesforce, are there capabilities there where you can capture form fields that would say that this user came from a specific paid campaign or a channel or a platform? That allows us to associate some additional information with conversions that you may have. So that allows us to get past just thinking about clicks and impressions and get a little further down that funnel, as Elise mentioned. So the other consideration that we think about is when we get into reporting of how, what else can we provide here that can assist with this? So we like to think of this with our clients as, what we usually will ask them, what kind of data can they provide to us that we can marry up potentially against our paid media efforts to show success. So, the example I mentioned earlier with Salesforce, we have clients where if a person comes from a paid campaign to hit a landing page, they fill out a form, they're capturing that information on their end. I don't need to see the names. Like, I don't care who the individuals are. But from their side, they could provide us the aggregated numbers. So I can see that, hey, on July 5th, we got 10 form submissions that day. I don't need to know that it's Joe and Elise and Jim, but it helps me to understand that, hey, if I got 10 leads from my Google campaign, I can start to, calculate cost per acquisition numbers and conversion rates and things like that. So those are things that we can work towards. The other way to think about it too within your system is thinking, how are you able to take leads internally on your side and match that information up against actual patients? So if you can see that in your EMR for patients that they may have like an email address in there, and we see for a lead capture that you have an email address, you can see that's a direct match. That's a very easy way to get at that. And that can be easier for some systems versus others based on data limitations, resources, things like that. But again, that's where it's important to think internally about what resources you have available. Who are the other people in your organization that can help you get at some of this information? And maybe outside of marketing, it might be your IT department or within a specific clinical office. But you can work to do this in a way that can capture information and stay within guidelines as well.
Scott, I appreciate that. As we're talking about directional visibility and getting some sense of connecting data and almost trying to wrap our worlds together externally in market to the audiences we're trying to connect to and internally to what we're seeing at our system, that sort of prompts me in the moment to just be super clear about our guidance, right? And so we said, hey, you should be taking a conservative approach and only working with partners, platforms, and tools that are willing to sign a BAA as it relates to this OCR guidance. But perhaps we should just be super clear that, for example, Google, especially GA4, Google Analytics, Meta, obviously the parent of Facebook and Instagram and some other platforms, today are unwilling to sign BAAs and therefore should not be those that you consider having code on your sites that allow placement of those third-party cookies, pixels, and tags. And so the guidance is remove code from your sites that do allow placement of those things, those online tracking technologies, if you haven't yet, unless there are protocols and standard practices in place that are aligned with HIPAA rules and there is no risk to violation of those things. Just for ultimate clarity, we have had conversations with healthcare systems in the recent past and at industry events that are not today current clients of ours, but haven't really made that decision yet. And we think that's incredibly risky to take a wait and see approach. And so as we think about removing the capabilities that we're so accustomed to as marketers and digital marketers, I'd love for us to get really specific about then what can we do if we're taking that conservative approach. So I'd love for both Elise and Scott, can you offer some specific strategies, some tactics, some very practical tools to employ for the healthcare marketer who is really seeking to continue to reach and engage and measure our work? What are the options that we have as healthcare marketers with the limitations of that online tracking technologies removed?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say from a search standpoint, we felt most heavily the loss of data in search. We're really optimizing for conversions, and the loss of that data really hindered our machine learning bidding strategies, our visibility into performance. And we felt that less so in more upper funnel channels where the expectation of running something like display or social, right, is not that you're driving an immense volume of last click conversion. So that wasn't necessarily the pain point that we felt upper funnel as much, but we did feel the strain of loss of targeting tactics that were once really successful at helping us reach extremely granular audiences that come into play within healthcare as we support a lot of specialized service lines and areas of care where we're talking to patients that have a lot of different qualifications outside of just basic things like gender and other demographics. So in the absence of those, these are a few ways that you can still target audiences in a way that is effective and is somewhat customized given the grand scheme of things. I will say outside of these things, there are definitely still behavioral targeting and third-party cookie reliant targeting options available to us. And we still do leverage those. They're available to us and they are a great way to reach audiences. So we definitely employ those as well. But starting to test into these areas is really beneficial, not just from a healthcare privacy standpoint, but also as we anticipate the eventual deprecation of third-party cookies, being in a place where you have a foundation built around these strategies that will kind of surpass that limitation is really impactful and helpful and a proactive approach to take. So the first one is contextual targeting, and this is sort of a complement to behavioral targeting where you are placing ads based on the content that exists on the page and less so who the individual consuming that content is. So not reliant on third-party cookies, so it checks a couple of boxes there and also has some benefits too. So when you are targeting based on the audience, they could be consuming any variety of content when they see your ad, and they just might not be in the headspace to take action based on the ad that you're putting in front of them, depending on what type of content they're consuming. So having the content that they're viewing really mirror the ad and the campaign that you're running has a lot of benefits. If someone is, for example, consuming content related to diabetes or weight loss, and then they're seeing an ad for bariatrics, they're in a very different headspace at that time than if they were on the Weather Channel app or what have you. So having that relevance is really beneficial. And there's a lot of custom capabilities when it comes to contextual targeting as well that you could employ. There are a lot of providers like Peer 39 and ComScore that will allow you to build custom contextual audience segments based on keywords that are important to you or different medical conditions and things of that nature. So there's a lot of great opportunity to be had from a contextual targeting standpoint. And then next, private marketplace deals. So this is also kind of going a little old school when it comes to marketing. This is something that we kind of moved away from and are now moving back into with all that's happened with third-party cookies and changes in the industry. But these are a really great way to get access to curated sets of really premium ad inventory. You know, programmatic can sometimes get a bad rap for just kind of being the scraps of inventory that are left over. But private marketplace deals are really where you can lock in great inventory that you can feel really confident about where it is, where it's showing up, and the quality of that inventory. And some examples of this as it relates to the healthcare space specifically could look like a run of site buy with WebMD or a run of site buy with WebMD where you're focused on allergies or asthma. So there's a lot of great content to be had from a private marketplace standpoint. We at Fathom are fortunate to have access to a lot of pre-negotiated private marketplace deals that we can tap into at a moment's notice. So there's a lot of benefit to running through PMPs in addition to having sort of those programmatic tactics with things like contextual layered on. And then lastly, second party data. There are a lot of great data providers in the healthcare space that have made it their mission to make sure that they have a lot of privacy safe data that they can make available to others. So whether that's a partnership with something like Doximity or Health Grades, or even an organization like Purple Lab, where they have a lot of great healthcare data at their disposal, and they can use that to create audience segments tailored to the needs for your specific service line or area of expertise. And then you can deploy those audience segments within your DSP or even through social platforms with a connection like a data onboarding system such as LiveRamp. So there's a lot of options from a second party data standpoint as well, where you can really tap into those who have built a really privacy safe area of data collection. And obviously, there are immense benefits to that because you are using data that is highly specific and they are often very transparent as to how that's collected. So you can feel really good about the data that you're using and also get some great results just because you're reaching a highly engaged audience.
Yeah. I would add on top of what Elise shared here that in addition to like targeting and marketplace strategies and approaches, there's also the area that you need to look at of thinking about like your web analytics solution that you have overall, like platforms. What are you using? What are alternatives that maybe you can pivot to? So some of you have maybe already switched to a different system. Many of our clients have switched to a system like Adobe Analytics. It's not to say that Adobe is far and away the best solution out there. It's a very good one. We do know that they are willing to sign a BAA, unlike Google. So in that case, it does provide you that extra layer of security that you want. But as we've talked with our clients, again, at industry events, talking with others, some of the logos that you're seeing here are a collection of other platforms for overall web analytics tracking that we're seeing pop up more and more in healthcare. And they all take different kinds of approaches. And so it's important if you're in that place where you're trying to figure out, I want to move to a new platform, what should it be? You really need to think about, I think, the features that you want to have in your product and also take into account cost considerations. So in these, smaller systems, sometimes in the past, we're able to use really the free version of Google Analytics. And I think the reality that we're seeing now is that there is not really a free web analytics tool out there anymore that's of any value. From this standpoint, if you want to be able to measure your website, you need to be prepared to invest in an analytics tool. So that's something as you speak with like your finance department, things like that, there needs to be planning discussions around that in terms of what your organization is willing to invest into tools. But what we see with some of these, you have tools like P-Week Pro, for example, which when you use it, it's very similar to the old universal Google Analytics in terms of features and capabilities. Site Improve, many people used it in the past as more of a content governance tool. It now has web analytics capabilities built into it as well that provide an interesting alternative to other tools that are out there. And we continue to see new players come in the market regularly. This is not going to stop anytime soon, especially as long as there's still questions about what's going on with the OCR Bulletin. Another thing to think about with those tools is other areas or platforms for measurement. So, I touched on call tracking before. That's an area that is another piece that can tie into this. Thinking about, your email system, like can that be integrated with these platforms? So like Adobe, that integrates obviously with like something like a Marketo very easily. So that's another consideration to take into account. And even just other tools you have at your disposal already that you can use that can give you information and not capture that personally identifiable information. So things like Google Search Console still continues to be a great tool to use to get some high-level SEO metrics. May not help from a paid media standpoint, but for other channels that are driving traffic to your website can be very helpful. So what we're seeing with our clients that, as they use these tools, they are able to get more visibility again into how they're acquiring users. So getting past just thinking about clicks and impressions and cost and getting down to, are we getting people who are filling out forms? Are we getting people who are maybe clicking a button to initiate a phone call? And then starting to get a better view of the various channels and how these can all work together. So understanding if it's coming from paid channels or SEO or other areas. And I think this also helps, it comes back to planning to a lot of what Elise has spoken to is it helps us develop a more strategic media plan. It's not just, hey, we're going to throw money on Google and see what happens. It's thinking of what places are out there that can help you from an acquisition standpoint, an awareness standpoint, an engagement standpoint, each of those different types of tactics. And then just helping to understand more about prospects and patients as they move their way through the patient journey. So using these platforms, we're able to connect data together a little better than when everything first happened with the OCR Bulletin to especially identify prospects. And that has led to us being able to work with our clients to deliver stronger stakeholder reporting. So not just spitting out numbers of here's how many clicks we got on Google, but using the metrics we can get and those conversion points to have really actionable insights that lead us to make data-driven decisions, not just guessing and thinking, I think this will work, but using the data to help inform us. And it just makes for better conversations and planning as we work with our clients on their efforts.
Appreciate that, Scott. One point of emphasis I would just bring forward is these 5 considerations that you and Elise have shared with us, some of the specific strategies for healthcare marketers to consider in light of the OCR Bulletin certainly are all relevant, but to see them come to life at an individual health system or hospital location has been really the combination of art and science, because no single approach is one that we simply stamp on or with our clients. And so the expertise, the nuance, the sophistication with which you've been able to help our clients is really something to behold. And it's a lot of fun to be a part of, despite the challenge of this, of this environment that we're operating in. So thank you both for that. A couple of key takeaways before we jump into some Q&A. There's a lot that we could talk about. Hopefully these were practical, helpful, valuable considerations and specific strategies that you can employ or consider employing. What might you take away from this time together? We have really 4 ideas that we think you might take away to your colleagues and your teams and to think about what happens next. The first is that change is not over. And so we have yet to see the last development on this topic. The recent ruling out of Texas by a federal judge is not the end of this story. And so more change is yet to come for sure. When, where, and how that will play out is anybody's best guess. And yet we have a responsibility as marketers to take some action and drive results in our systems. And so as we do that, the second takeaway is a careful, intentional, thoughtful, but conservative approach in your use of online tracking technologies. Remove that code where it's a risk to violating HIPAA, of course, and be conservative with how you interpret and manage around that OCR bulletin. We'd be happy to talk more about that in depth, how we do that with our client partners. The third is something you can do on your own or with a valued agency partner, and that is intentionally set a new normal. Be very mindful and thoughtful about revisiting things like campaign goals and your approach to media planning, the optimization strategies that you employ and are available to you, all so that you can stay in line with this evolving landscape as it continues to unfold. And then lastly, the right mix of responsibility and creativity. Stay responsible, but get creative in terms of your approach to measurement and reporting. Again, marketers are responsible for driving results, are accountable for ensuring that activities turn into outcomes. And so you have opportunity available in your system to find insight, even if directional, to help make decisions and drive better marketing investments and strategies and approaches going forward. So with that, I'd love to create some space for Q&A. Joe, can you help us with that?
Yes, I can, Jim. We have had a handful of questions roll in. Scott, I think the first one is going to be for you, and let me just read that for the group. So that question is, you mentioned, Scott, that using platforms like Instapage for tracking engagement metrics. Can you elaborate on how alternative tracking methods work and maybe their effectiveness compared to the measurement tools that we're accustomed to?
Sure. So what we've seen with a platform like Instapage, for example, is that you can use that in a way. So if typically we would drive traffic to a landing page and then they will direct traffic elsewhere. So we're not necessarily capturing on that page on a form, anything like that, but it can pass into another page on the website where you may have a form that ties into your CMS. And in cases like that, we have seen things where we can attach parameters onto that link from the landing page that can help inform when you capture the data in the form that this is coming from a paid campaign. So in this example, I'm saying there are some limitations there where it's lumping everything together as paid media, which gets us part of the way there, maybe not all the way there, but it's better than nothing. Alternatives that I have seen from just in conversations with other people in the industry is some organizations have taken an approach where they may have a landing page where they make copies of it. And as you capture leads, they're able to associate the form on one page as being one channel versus another. That can work for getting into those details of being able to see by channel, but it adds a lot of extra work. So it's not something I would necessarily recommend if you're doing a whole bunch of channels and different efforts. But if you are more limited with the types of campaigns that you're running and the amount of channels you use, that can be a viable option as well. So we see things like that. And with form fields, there are things you can do with, adding kind of like hidden fields into that. That doesn't compromise anything from like a HIPAA standpoint, but it helps to pass along variables that you can put in your tracking links from ads. So it can tell you that this came from Google or Microsoft or Facebook. That's been effective for us too with several of our clients, because when they then pass the information back to us, again, I'm not seeing names, but I can see 10 of those conversions they're seeing on their side came from Google, 8 came from Microsoft, and 5 came from LinkedIn. So like something like that can be helpful for us where we're just trying to aggregate results. And you can then tie that data into your actual performance data to kind of give a more full picture.
Thank you, Scott. Elise, a couple questions coming your way now. First, from an attendee whose organization is ultra conservative, as they describe, managing to consumer perception instead of a reality that we operate within. In their organization, contextual targeting has been met with resistance. And so any recommendations from our work with clients, from your work with clients, on how to navigate conversations with legal teams internally at the organization when met with resistance, especially relative to contextual targeting?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say with contextual targeting and kind of knowing the content that your ad's going to be up against, it's sort of a blessing and a curse, because then you have questions around, well, this seems really relevant to what I'm looking at. Why am I seeing this content? But also you have the knowledge in your back pocket to be able to be really strategic about the messaging that you're putting in front of them. So being really mindful of, if you are going to go as far as placing sort of a service specific message and service specific content, how can you be really gentle and sort of empathetic in the message that you're putting in front of someone so that they don't feel so personally seen in that moment, and that they do feel like they're receiving a resource and that something really beneficial is in front of them. And that goes for the ad itself as well as the landing page, and being mindful that you're not kind of just funneling someone into a very conversion heavy experience without the empathy and surrounding support of all kind of the context and background information that the organization offers. And then I would say too, from just a legal standpoint, really being armed with information around the safety and from a privacy standpoint of contextual targeting. And a lot of our media partners have been really great at helping provide us with some of that documentation around the safety and regulations, and how different data providers are adhering to privacy regulations, so that we can arm our clients with that information. So I would definitely tap your media partners for support in those conversations as well.
Thank you, Elise. That brings us to just about time. So I'm going to transition back to Jim to share some next steps.
Thanks, Joe. And thank you all for attending and giving us your time. Again, I hope it was valuable. We would love to continue the conversation and understand more about your specific experience if you've got questions. And this is not the end. This is just the second in our 5-part series. And so we hope you will join us for upcoming sessions. In 2 weeks on July 25th, we will be digging into how to find growth when resources are limited. So a very performance-oriented conversation. Looking forward to that. And then in August, we will have 2 sessions to round us out, both related to artificial intelligence. And so the first really focused on, as a healthcare marketer, how to think about AI adoption strategies and considerations. And then lastly, on the 22nd of August, a bit more application to AI in healthcare marketing. So again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your interest. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.